This morning we're going to be looking at two passages of Scripture. We're going to start off in John chapters 20 and 21. John 20 and 21. I'm going to be reading from the New International Version. Those of you who were here last week know that we're in the middle of a series that is spring break inspired, and it's called Just Stop. Each week we're looking at something that as children of God we need to just stop doing. But we're not looking at the obvious sins. We're not looking at lying or murdering, which, by the way, if you're murdering, stop that too. But we're not looking at things like that. We're looking at the nuances, the little things that some Christians live their whole lives and never stop doing. The things that I know God is just looking down from heaven saying, would you just stop? Last week we talked about worrying. We looked at Matthew 25 where Jesus tells us, if you're worrying, stop it. And if you're not, don't start. We looked at the reasons that Jesus said not to worry. I'm not going to give you those today. You can find them by watching that sermon on our YouTube channel, CenterPointNWA, or you can go to www.CenterPointNWA.com. We also looked at 1 Peter 5:7, where we're told to turn all of our anxiety over to God because He cares for us. Did anybody do a better job this week of not worrying? Go ahead and brag on yourself real quick. All right. One person stopped worrying. This week I had to remind Courtney and Christina several times of my sermon because they started worrying, and I was like, did you even listen on Sunday? Courtney said, I know. At one point, she couldn't find her keys, and she had gotten herself so worked up, she had convinced herself she was not going to have a car to go back to college. And I said, Courtney, we haven't even looked yet. I said, what are 85% of the things that we worry about? Things that are never going to happen. All right, so stop worrying. Okay. Would you just stop? Last week we learned that according to recent studies, lots of people worry. All kinds of people, almost everyone worries. But today we're actually talking about something that I think more people do than worry. Has anyone been on Facebook this week? Man, hadn't it been fun to watch and see what everybody was doing on spring break? Hasn't that been exciting? I have really enjoyed that. There have been people out at the beach. There have been people out on vacations. It's been a lot of fun. On spring break, there is no shortage of content on Facebook because everyone is out going new places, trying new things, and eating new foods. And they all want to share it with the world. To me, it's kind of neat that we have the ability to share our lives with one another in that way, to let folks know what we're doing and be able to see what they're doing. But if we're not careful, it's easy to get jealous of those people that are doing the things we wish we were doing, isn't it? I was actually talking to someone this week, and they said, is it wrong that I hate everyone who's posting beach photos? Well, you guys know me. I'm way too holy for that. So I told this person, well, you shouldn't be jealous of them. You should just be happy for them. And besides, who has time to be mad at those people when there are people posting pictures from Disney World? Those are the ones I hate. Today we're talking about comparison. Now, I don't want you to raise your hands or your neighbor's hands. I learned that one last week. But has anyone here ever struggled with comparison? Comparison is the worst. I heard a story one time about a boy who learned the dangers of comparison at a young age. This boy had the same birthday as his little sister. She was 3 years younger, but they shared the same birthday. It was the same date. So every year on that date, it was in December, they would both get a card from Grandma who lived across the country. Grandma would send each of them a card, and there'd be a $20 check in each one of the cards. But the little boy thought it would be fun. Every year, they would open up those cards, and he'd say, $100! The little girl would cry and run off to her room. This happened for 3 years. $100! She'd cry and run off to her room. Well, Grandma got wind of this little prank. Instead of just getting on to the boy, she decided to get back at him. So one year she sent their cards, and they got their cards and opened them up, and just before the boy got his chance to say, $100, the little girl looked at her check and said, $100! The little boy ran to his room and cried. Because comparison is the worst. I heard a quote that I really liked. It said, the fastest way to kill something special is to compare it to something else. Isn't that true? The fastest way to kill something special is to compare it to something else. You move into a new house, you love that house. It's like a castle compared to your old house. You don't even know how you're going to find enough furniture to fill the house up. You move in and you just love it. You're mowing your grass every weekend and keeping everything clean and tidy and well maintained. And then your friend gets a bigger house with more land. And all of a sudden you hate your house. See, you've killed something special by comparing it to something else. You get a new car, or new to you anyways. Man, that car is shiny. It smells good. There's no food crumbs in the floorboard and no melted crayon in the seats. You love that car. Every time you get together with someone and you've got to go to somewhere as a group, you're like, well, I'll drive. You guys want, I'll drive. And then your brother-in-law gets a car that's newer and faster and has heated seats. All of a sudden you hate your car that you loved so much because you've killed something special by comparing it to something else. How about this one? You've been rocking your diet. You've lost 25 pounds. You're so proud of yourself. Everyone who sees you is telling you how good that you look, and you're telling them what they should do to lose weight. Everywhere you go, you're walking a little taller, a little prouder. More proudly, I guess would be the way to say it. And then you have lunch with an old friend. And they're on a diet, and they've lost 40 pounds. And before you know it, you hate them, yourself, and Jenny Craig. Because you've killed something special by comparing it to something else. The fastest way to kill something special is to compare it to something else. And unfortunately, social media has made this so much worse. You're struggling just to make ends meet. You can't even afford to take a spring break road trip to see family. And you get on Facebook and find out that one of your friends is on their third vacation this year. And they take that picture that for some reason everybody wants to take. You know the one. It's their legs and a book on the beach or at a pool. You've seen that, right? We've all seen the picture. I don't know why everyone takes a picture of their legs and a book. But you get online, you see that picture, and you're like, I hate you and your stupid book. This happens so often. We're living our own lives, and we get on social media, and we see how much better everyone else's life is than ours. And we begin to despise them and ourselves. Stephen Furtick talks about this, pastor of Elevation Church. He says that one of the biggest causes of insecurity today is that we are comparing our behind the scenes with everyone else's highlight reel. Think about that for a minute. We're comparing our behind the scenes with everyone else's highlight reel. You see, we're looking at the problems that we face every day, the struggles that we face. We know what's going on in our lives. We look at our strained finances and our rocky marriage and our dirty house. We look at our kids who don't ever want to spend time with us. They just come home and go to their room. And then we look online and we see that person who's got that selfie in their perfectly clean house. And they've got the picture of that fancy dinner out with their husband. And they're both all smiles. And then we see a picture of them on vacation, and it's them and their kids, and they're all around. They got big old grins. You can tell everyone's just having the best time of their life. We see that and we decide their life must be better than mine. It's got to be better than mine. But see, what we don't see is that they framed that selfie perfectly so that it didn't catch the laundry piled up on the couch or the coats hung on the chairs. We didn't see that moment on that date where they took a picture with their spouse was the only moment of that entire night when he stopped looking at his phone and looked at them. He didn't say one word to her the whole night. We don't see that the kids were fighting and crying in the 45 pictures that didn't get uploaded. Just in the one that did. We're comparing our behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reel, and we're killing something special by comparing it to something else. Somebody say comparison is the worst. That's why Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 10:12 that we dare not classify or compare ourselves with some who commend themselves. He says, when they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they are not wise. In other words, those who compare themselves are not wise. Social media makes it worse, but did you know that comparison is not a new thing? Comparison goes back a long, long time. I remember there was one meal that we read about where the disciples were all together and they were arguing about which one of them was greatest. And then they asked Jesus, Lord, which one of us is the best? I mean, I guess if you're going to go to a judge, that's the one to ask. Let's look at John chapter 20. John chapter 20, and I want you to watch here what John does as he writes this story. We're going to start in verse number 2. Jesus has been raised from the dead. Mary Magdalene has found that the tomb is empty. And in verse number 2, John says, so she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved. Let's pause here for a minute. You guys know who John's talking about? He's talking about John. He's talking about himself. And he refers to himself as the one Jesus loved. Get over yourself. John does two things here that I like. First of all, he refers to himself as the one Jesus loved, as if Jesus didn't love all of them. And secondly, he refers to himself constantly in the third person. Don't be that guy. Nobody likes that guy. Brian doesn't like that guy. She runs to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one that Jesus loved, and she says, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they've put him. So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Now watch this. Both of them were running, John says, but the other disciple, who? John. The other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. That's the first time he tells us, I'm faster than Peter is. Verse 5, he bent over and looked at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him. There's number 2. I'm faster than Peter. And went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was lying in its place, separate from the linen. Verse number 8, finally, the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, 3 times. I'm faster than Peter. also went inside. He saw and believed. Can you believe this guy? I mean no disrespect, but come on, John. The biggest event in all of history has just taken place. The Messiah who was crucified 3 days earlier has been risen from the dead and is not in the grave. And he wants us to know who won a foot race. Can we all agree that John has a problem? But he's not the only one. Because if you flip over to chapter 21, we'll see a story where after this the disciples are out fishing. And they're fishing all night long. Morning time they look up and they see Jesus on the shore. Peter, he's excited. He jumps right in the water and swims to Jesus. The other disciples finally get there in the boat. They pull in all the fish and they have breakfast together. And then Jesus and Peter are having a discussion. It's a discussion you guys have probably heard before. Jesus looks at Peter and says, Peter, do you love me? Peter says, Lord, you know I do. Jesus says, feed my sheep. 3 times this happens. Peter, do you love me? Lord, you know I do. Then feed my sheep. Then in verse 18 of John 21, Jesus looks at Peter and says, very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, follow me. Jesus tells Peter, dude, when you get old, they're going to crucify you. They're going to stretch out your hands. And they're going to lead you where you don't want to go. And by this, I will be glorified. I bet Peter would have liked better news. That's not the best news to get. I mean, if I were choosing, I'd have the Lord say, well, you're going to serve me and people are going to come to know me because of you, and then you're going to die in your sleep. Well, thanks, Jesus. No. Peter says, or Jesus says to Peter, you're going to be crucified. And then we read in verse 20, Peter turned around and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. Peter turns around and sees John. He's just been told that he's going to be crucified, and by doing that, by going through that, he's going to glorify God. He turns around, he sees John. You know what he says? What about him? What about him, Lord? I'm going to glorify you. Is he going to glorify you? Is he as important as I am? Is he as a big a deal as I am? Is he going to die a gruesome death like me? What about him? What about John? See, both Peter and John were obsessed with comparison. Now, right now, I know there's people in this room, you're thinking, man, I'm not like that. I'm good. Some of you are even thinking, man, I'm glad I'm not like Peter and John. I'm so much better than they are. I would never compare myself. You'll get that later. Well, don't check out yet because you might not be as good as you think you are. Today I want us to look at 3 types of comparison that will kill something special. The first type is wanting to have what others have. Wanting to have what others have. This is the most common one. It's the biggest one. This is when we look at what others have and we want it for ourselves. I don't want my house. I want his house because it's better. I don't want my car. I want his car because it's better. I don't want my job. I want his job because it's better. I don't want my wife. I want his wife. She's better. Wanting to have what other people have. There are 2 reasons that this is wrong. 2 reasons it's bad. The first is because it's called covetousness. Covetousness. And the seventh commandment that God gave Israel says not to do it. When God was giving out the 10 commandments, he thought that this was important enough to have it be on the list. Exodus 20:17 says, "You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor." Don't covet. Don't want what your neighbor has. That's the first reason it's wrong, is because God says don't do it. But the second reason is this. When you want to have what others have, it's like telling God, I don't like what you gave me. I don't like what you gave me. Have you ever given someone a gift and they didn't like it? Doesn't that just kind of sting a little bit? I remember last year when we helped out with the Easter egg hunt, we went out and bought 4 bicycles, one for each age group, so that we could give a bicycle to these kids that got a prize egg. And when we gave those bikes out, one little girl, man, she rode off on that bike with the biggest smile that I've ever seen in my life. She's probably still on the bicycle today. But 3 of those kids were like, I don't want that. I was like, you need a spanking. What do you mean you don't want that? I don't care if you want it or not. You smile and say thank you. That's what I was taught. But now, imagine doing that to God. Imagine finding the house that you love, or the job that you love, or the man that you love. And you pray and you say, God, please, if it's your will, let me have this thing. Let me have this house. Let me get this job. Let me marry this man. And then somebody else gets one that you feel like is better. And all of a sudden you're like, God, I don't like what you gave me. I don't like this house anymore. God has gone to the trouble of moving all the obstacles out of the way. He's given you a gift, given you something that you asked for. And your way of honoring him is saying, I don't want that. See, we don't think about it that way, but that's what comparison is. When you say, I want to have what they have, that's saying, God, I don't like what you gave me. The second type of comparison is wanting to do what others do. Anyone ever seen this one at work? Somebody gets a promotion or a new assignment, somebody else gets mad. I wanted to do that. Why'd they choose them? I want to do that. We see it in the church all the time. Now, not here at CenterPoint, because you guys are good people. But at other churches I've been at, I've seen it. Man, why did they pick them to lead a life group? I wanted to lead a life group. It's not my fault nobody likes me. They should have chosen me. Why did they pick them to be the head of the hospitality team? I'm hospitable. I only come to church 1 out of every 4 weeks, but I'm hospitable. They should have chosen me to be in charge. Careful, Pastor. Man, when I signed up to volunteer, I wanted to be on the worship team. I wanted to be in front of everyone and hold a microphone. Instead, they asked me to hold a broom. Or they put me on the parking team. I don't want to do this. I want to do what that person's doing. Guys, I'll be honest with you, I've struggled with this one in the past. When Christina and I were youth pastors at our previous church, we had one of the largest youth groups in the state. We were in the top 15, if not the top 10. We took more kids to camp every year than anybody else. We were the best. But when when youth conventions or youth camp speakers or youth conferences came around, not one time did they say, hey, Brian, do you want to speak? Do you want to lead this session? And for a while, that bothered me. I was like, well, why aren't they choosing me? I want to do what they're doing. Why can't I do what they're doing? Later on, they asked me to, and I found out quick I didn't want to do what they were doing. I would so much rather hang out with our students and minister to them than be in a room full of grumpy youth leaders, trying to teach them how to do what 14 other people have tried to teach them how to do. But I struggled with it. Maybe that's you. Maybe you're at your job and you're thinking, man, I want to do what they're getting to do. Why don't I get to do that? Or maybe at church even, maybe here, you're like, I want to do what they're getting to do. Let me tell you, if you're not getting to do something that you want to do, there's one of two reasons. The first is you're needed somewhere else. God needs you somewhere else. The Bible tells us that He moves the body how He needs the body so that it functions best. The second reason, though, and this may be hard for some of you to hear, is because you're not ready. You're not ready to do the thing that you want to do. Either your mentality about it is wrong, you don't have the character to do it, you're not faithful enough to do it. There are real legitimate reasons why God may be keeping you from doing what you want to do. We read in Matthew 25 where there's a story where Jesus illustrates that God takes people who are faithful over a few things and promotes them to be over many. If you're not getting to do what you want to do, you need to evaluate yourself because there's a chance you're not ready. And if you evaluate yourself and you find, you know what, I really am ready, then that probably means that God needs you somewhere else. He's putting the body where the body needs to be. And if you're a rear end, He's not going to use you as a head. That's all there is to it. Christine, you better come to the keyboard. Wanting to have what others have. Wanting to do what others do. And finally, wanting to be what others are. This is a hard one. Have you ever looked at someone else and thought, man, I wish I could be like them? Why don't I have the gifts that they have? Why don't I have the skills that they have? Church, I'll never forget the moment in my life that I realized I'm not athletic. I was probably 30 years old. And all my life I thought I had been athletic. Don't laugh, Connor. And I realized that everyone else is faster than me. Everyone else hits softballs further than I do. Everyone else knows how to throw a dodgeball with speed when mine looks like a rainbow. I'm telling you, as a youth pastor, that was a humbling moment in my life. I was like, why can't I be more like them? But I realize now that God has gifted me differently. And someday I'll discover what those gifts are. But has anyone else fallen into this trap, wanting to be what others are? Man, can you imagine if I could sing as good as Christina and play the guitar as good as Ben and the drums as good as Justin and be as tall as John and as healthy as Zach and as good looking as... I guess I'm going to go with Randy. Can you imagine if I took all those pieces and put them together with my inquisitive eyes and my friendly smile? Man, I'd be an overnight success. I'd be the celebrity of all celebrities. But that's not what God's called me to be. And let me tell you something. If you're looking at that person who you think has it all and wishing you were like them, I'll tell you right now, they don't have it all, because God doesn't work that way. There's an area in their life where they wish they were like someone else. But see, wanting to have what other people have is telling God, I don't like what you gave me. Wanting to do what other people do is telling God, I don't like how you use me. But this one's worst of all, I think, because wanting to be what other people are is telling God, I don't like how you made me. In other words, it's saying, God, you messed up. You made me wrong. You see, Psalms tells us that God knitted me together in my mother's womb. In other words, he was actively involved in making me what I am. Ephesians tells us that I am God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus for a work that he has set forth for me to do. Think about that, church. If I could sing as good as Christina and play instruments as good as Ben and Justin and be as tall as John and good looking as Randy, if I had all of those things going for me, would that have kept me from being here doing what God called me to do? I wouldn't trade this for the world. If I've got to be old and slow and not able to throw a dodgeball to pastor this church, bring me a wheelchair. I'll sit in it. Comparison is the worst. I wonder how Jesus feels about it. Well, luckily, we don't have to wonder. You remember our story in John chapter 21 where Jesus tells Peter, feed my sheep. And then he tells him that he's going to be crucified and that it's going to glorify God. And the first thing out of Peter's mouth is, well, what about John? Here's what Jesus says. I like Jesus. Man, he's so cool. I do wish I could be him. Not him, like him. Jesus tells Peter, if I want him, if I want John to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You follow me. Why do you care what about John? Jesus says. It doesn't matter to you what I do with John. What matters to you is what I'm telling you to do. You follow me. You feed my sheep. You build my church. You be crucified to glorify me. What's it to you, Peter? Why are you concerned with John's mission? You have your own. I heard a pastor say this. There are two things that comparison does. One of them is it makes you feel inferior. And the other is it makes you feel superior. And neither one of those glorify God. I told you about our youth group at our previous church. I never really thought that I struggled with pride. Not ever. It's easy to think that when you have one of the biggest youth groups in the state. When you're going to youth camp and you're running a charter bus and you're riding in a charter bus, and then there's another van following it, and another 3 cars, and then, I mean, it's easy to be humble, right? I never thought I struggled with pride until I stepped out of that role and came to pastor a church that has about the same number of people as my youth group had. And then we went to youth camp with 9 people in a borrowed church van that barely made the trip. Used to, when we went to camp, we would have 2 or 3 boy rooms that were just our church and 2 or 3 girl rooms that were just our church. And they would put these small groups that didn't have a lot of people in with us just to fill spots. And then we went back, and we were the group that they were plugging in just to fill spots. And I realized, you know what? I'm the same person today that I was then. And back then, I could compare myself to other churches and feel superior. Now, if I wanted, I could compare myself to other churches and feel inferior. But I'm the same person. And I'm just doing what God called me to do and being who God called me to be. That's freeing, church. That's so freeing when you become content with what God has designed your life to be. I want everyone in the room to bow your head and close your eyes. If you're here today and you say, you know what? I struggle with comparison. Maybe you say, man, I never feel like I'm good enough. I'm not ever as good as everyone else. My life is terrible. I don't even know what to do sometimes. Or maybe you're on the other end and you say, you know what? I realized hearing you talk just now that, quite honestly, I'm kind of like John. I feel like I'm the only one that Jesus loves. I'm the only one he's gifted. I'm the only one ... If that's you, you say, you know what? Today, I need to learn to just stop comparing and be content having what Jesus wants me to have, doing what Jesus wants me to do, and being what Jesus wants me to be. If that's you, lift up your hand. Father God, you see these hands all over the room, hands lifted. Lord, I pray that you would help us. Help us to just stop comparing ourselves. Lord, the only thing that I want to compare myself to is the previous version of myself. I just want to be better than I used to be. And tomorrow I want to be better than I am today. That may mean having more things, or it may mean having less. It may be doing something that the world perceives as greater, or it may be doing something that the world perceives as lesser. It may be utilizing gifts that I have now or others that you're going to give me. But God, I just want to be who you want me to be and where you want me to be. Let me stop comparing myself. And God, I pray for each one that's lifted their hand and said that they need to stop comparing. Pray that you will help us, God. Help us to realize that we are who you made us to be. In Jesus' name.